And we're live!
Okay. Hi, guys. Welcome to one of our final cake sessions. Cake is fully donation based. PayPal online, our little donation box in here, full of just nice, scrappy tips and quick little tricks for getting your business started without funding, the old DIY style. Today we're going to be talking about real estate and getting a lease for actual brick and mortar businesses and how to kind of delve into that whole world without having a lot of experience and kind of go in seeming like a seasoned veteran. So without more further ado, let's talk about some real estate. So the first thing anyone is always going to tell you about real estate is choosing a location. As we all know, is location, that whole thing. So there's a lot that goes into choosing a location, especially for your business. A little different than kind of choosing a nice place to like have a home or something like that. The first thing you really want to think about is what you want out of a location for your own actual business, which really varies from like business to business. If you have a float tank business like us, then you're really interested in kind of being way out in the public and trying to be viewed a lot. So we really wanted a like full, right in the middle of the public eye retail store. But maybe if you have, a colonoscopy center, you don't necessarily need to have like bright LED lights trying to get everyone in. You want to be a little more tucked away. Or even if you want to have like a spa that's a little more, seclusive, then, that informs the decision of where you want to be a lot. So take a look at the neighborhood. Neighborhoods have different feelings to them. If you don't live in the city that you are trying to find a place to be in, then you should definitely talk to people in that city to get a feel for like what the different neighborhoods are like, and just kind of look at different like areas of traffic and where the highways are and where people go and whether people even commute from neighborhood to neighborhood. Different cities are like. Some cities have neighborhoods where people just stick in their own neighborhood, and other cities people really get around a lot. So if you have any friends in the area, try to talk to some people who live there and get a good feel for it. Once you kind of narrow that down, you probably want to look at what other stores or shops are in the area that you're trying to find a store. Shops that are similar to yours can be advantageous because people who might be your customers are going to be in the area and coming by there. Or maybe you want to completely differentiate yourself and put yourself in the middle of a completely different place and stand out. So again, depends a lot on your business, but a really important thing to look around and see what other stores are in the area. If you have like a nice little mom and pop shop, then it's nice to be around other kind of independently run businesses instead of in the middle of a strip mall or something like that. So check out the other shops, even go in and meet the people and kind of see what they have to say and see what their deal is. And then also just meeting your neighbors, especially your like direct neighbors, the people actually on either side of the building that you're looking at is really important. More than just for knowing who they are and seeing if like you guys are compatible, but also for very practical reasons. If you are opening a spa, like you don't want it to be next to a jackhammering emporium, and just make sure that the way that they run their business is not going to interfere with the way that you run your business, because you're just going to have a lot of problems if that's the case, because you both are going to be stuck there together, both trying to run your business, and those things are going to be in conflict. So always a great thing is to see the neighbors and see what's going on and kind of make sure that it's going to be copacetic. Once you kind of feel out the more kind of loose things like that and the things that are more about like, aesthetics and kind of where you want your place to be, there's a lot more nitty-gritty stuff to look into with your building as well. Specifically the kind of more construction-y stuff, like plumbing and electrical and what state the roof is in and that kind of stuff, especially if you need to change any of that stuff. That's really where it comes into play. So if you know for sure that opening a business means that you need to completely redo the plumbing in an entire shop, or that you have huge electrical draws and are going to need to add in a bunch of new electrical plans into your building, or if you're trying to take over two shops and combine them into one, you need to move a wall, then you really want to look into that stuff, because there's a lot of unexpected expenses that can come from that, like your sewer lines being 10 feet deep in the ground unexpectedly, or the fact that you need a whole new breaker box to support the extra electrical draw, or if the wall you're trying to move is a load-bearing wall. All those things can be really costly and take a huge amount of time, and at the very least, are nice to know and can really help with the decision you make of where you wanna settle down. Size is another really big one. Size is a lot of big amount of your business can depend based on your size, especially for a retail shop. A lot of retail shops depend on how much they can actually hold in their shop, which kind of directly relates to how much they can sell or the variety of their products. So it can be an important factor. With commercial centers, size is generally measured in price per square foot per year, which is why sometimes when you're looking at commercial spots, you'll see things like $16 a square foot. And you'll be like, what are they talking about? Because you're used to having a set monthly price. But it's easy to calculate out. You just multiply it by the amount of square feet, and then you divide it by 12 to get what the actual monthly rent would be. And it's actually nice because it's a really great way to easily compare different buildings, despite their difference in square footage, to kind of see what the relative value is and be able to easily identify what other factors are making the price per square foot per year more or less expensive. Other things to consider, just try to think of everything that you need in your shop. Like if you want an office in there, you're going to have to make room for that. Do you need to put an extra bathroom in? Are you putting in a huge new HVAC system and that's going to take up, 10 square feet of room that you weren't expecting? Try to really think through all the things that you want to put in because space goes really quickly and a lot faster than you would imagine. In general, you can get a better deal on larger spaces if you're willing to go for it. And you can also just get a larger space and then sublet portions of it. Although you will need to get that in your lease that allows you to sublet it. And you do want to be careful because that can be a ton of work. So if you're not prepared to take on the work of actually constantly making sure someone is in that portion of the building and kind of becoming their mini landlord, then maybe that's not the path that you want to take. But it is always a great option if you're trying to kind of save some money and also have room for potential expansion in the future. And the last thing when you are actually walking around and taking a look at different spaces is to make sure to have an open mind about it and really allow the different spaces to kind of influence the plans that you had to go in. Shops are really different. Spaces are really different. There are no just kind of boilerplate rectangular prisms of businesses out there. They all have their little quirks. So if you go in with a really, really solidified image in your head, it's going to be hard to find anything to conform to that. And on the other hand, if you go in and get inspired by the different spaces that you look at, then it can be really fun and you can actually come up with a bunch of new great ideas and maybe your business did need a ball pit room now that little corner room is available there. So yeah, go in with an open mind and take a look around and kind of adjust your plans based on what you see in front of you. And also, you want to kind of do a little research on the actual landlord and leasing company that you're going to be getting involved with, because you're basically entering a relationship with this person. You're going to be stuck with them for a long time. So kind of do your little digging and see if they're actually good people to work with. You can look on the internet if they're actually kind of more of a big company.
Sorry. Everybody else okay?
Yeah, I think we're
Okay.
good. You can look up a company if they're big enough on the internet. We have the internet is vast now, so even smaller individual people might have some information on there. But if there are any other tenants in the building that are owned by the same landlord, go talk to them because they're going to know better than anyone. They've been dealing with the landlords for however long they've been there and are a great source of information. So yeah, do your research on them too, and make sure that make sure that you're not getting stuck with someone who's gonna lead you to a horrible couple of years. You can also get something called a non-disturbance by lender clause written into your lease, which actually means that if the landlord of your building ever defaults and possession of the building gets taken over by whoever was lending them money, then they have to keep your lease intact, which is really great. So that's a nice thing to kind of throw in there. Non-disturbance by lender clause. So that way, if something does go wrong, your entire lease isn't just kind of discarded and thrown to the wind. So there's a little bit about trying to actually find a location. Once you kind of nail that down, again, it's always great to bring in experts, especially with that construction stuff too, if you kind of narrow it down to one specific place before you actually enter negotiations. Because then you can really just have an electrician come in and be like, this is going to be $20,000 to change this. And you're like, okay, that's not going to work. Or maybe like it's still the perfect space, but that gives you just a much larger bargaining chip when you have to say to the landlord, like, oh, well, this is going to cost me $20,000 to adjust this portion of it. So yeah, actually bring in some people for any like extensive work that you need to do to get an idea of what you're getting into. Once you do that and you're actually to the point of kind of working out the lease itself, then it's really great to kind of go over the lease and really read it and go through it with a fine-tooth comb. Lawyers are great for this kind of thing, but it's totally something you can do yourself too, especially for the first like run through. I mean, it's it seems really intimidating at first, but once you kind of start reading it, it's written in a way that like mostly it kind of makes sense and is in terms that most people can understand. So read through your lease. Things you really want to look for are who has responsibility over certain things. It's really like what most of a lease is. It's like who's responsible for when X, Y, and Z go wrong. So that's really what you're looking for a lot is who carries responsibility on different things. So anything from noise complaints to all the way to the roof collapsing are generally written out for all those different situations, and that's really what you want to look for is kind of like the liability for all the different things, improvements, repairs, like general maintenance. Just go through and see like in what situations you're responsible for something and in what situations the landlord is. A lot of these responsibilities come down to something called different types of net leases. As a net lease is what's opposed to a gross lease, which is what most people are used to when renting a home or an apartment. And a gross lease is when you just pay for the rent and sometimes the utilities, in the case of apartments, sometimes not. But rent and utilities is the gross lease. And then most commercial places are actually done on what's called a net lease. And the net lease just means that you pay for more like expenses of the building, basically, or what goes into it. So there's something called a single net lease, which means you pay the rent and the utilities just like you normally would, except you also pay the property taxes on the building. And then above that is a double net lease, which is the same thing. So you get the rent and the utilities and the property tax from the single net, and then you also get building insurance thrown on top of it. So now you have to actually pay for insuring the building. And then you go up to a triple net lease, which is the most common thing for commercial spaces. And again, that's everything from before: rent, utilities, the property taxes from the single net, the building insurance from the double net, and maintenance and repair of common areas is usually what's written in there for a triple net lease. So property tax, building insurance, and maintenance and repair of all the common areas. You'll see this as like an NNN sometimes written out if you're ever actually looking at a lease and trying to take a look at it. And that obviously adds a whole new kind of layer onto it as soon as you throw in something kind of as vague as maintenance and repair of all common areas. So that's really where you want to take a look at what those common areas are and whether the roof is included and whether it's not, and what kind of damage to those common areas becomes your responsibility. A lot of times that makes a difference, whether like you damaged it or whether a hurricane came in can be a lot different. So really look through that. Things to definitely look out for are things like roofs and any like big structural thing, because those can generally be really expensive and also generally like have been there for years that you were not in the building and shouldn't necessarily be your responsibility anyway.
And I think interior and exterior too is like usually broken down.
That's right, interior and exterior. Like the foundation of the buildings. There's really a lot of different things they can spell out in there. And tenants are like, every lease that they hand you is most likely going to be written in their favor. So like oftentimes like they'll just throw all the responsibility onto you and you have to be like, hey, well, this roof's not looking too good already. Like, I don't know if I want responsibility for all the leaks that are going to happen and like all this kind of stuff. So definitely look over there, and it's a lot of good grounds for negotiating as well. And then there's one more that's on top of that called a bondable lease, which are also known as absolute triple net leases, true triple net leases, or hell or high water triple net leases. Those are really intense. And basically just means that you're responsible for everything. Like all risk associated with the building basically becomes your responsibility, which means the only benefit you have of having a landlord and not owning the building is that like you didn't have to put the money down to actually pay for it in the first place. So these are crazy and really intense and mean that like anything from a flood down the street to like a giant cyclops coming and destroying the roof with laser eyes, like all become your responsibility. So if you see something called a bondable lease written down that they're trying to get you to agree to, I would be very cautious.
Run. Run.
Things that you can do with triple net leases that can help in your favor. Sometimes you can ask for caps on these so that they can't go above a certain amount. Those are pretty hard to convince people of and hard to come by. A lot more typical is to request a breakdown of the costs from their end that they give to you, which means that basically there's nothing they can do to kind of like pull one over on you. If they're giving you their property tax that they're paying and all the different repair and maintenance and everything that goes into it, then you just see exactly what their costs are, and they can't really ask you for more money than that. So that's always a nice thing to throw in there, and is like free for them to do, and generally just like an easy thing to get through negotiation. Another thing to look in your lease for is any sort of limitations on the way that you can run your business. For example, sometimes leases will actually limit the type of things that you can sell. So really like pay attention to that and see if like you care, or if it's written in a way that's restrictive to you, or if you already plan to sell things that are going to make you have trouble with the way it's written. The hours that you can be open, the signage that you can put up, the size of it, levels of noise you can make, just like anything in there that seems to prohibit like anything that you want to do is always just something to take note of and see if it's a concern of yours or not, and something that you can maybe like negotiate out. Another one is insurance requirements, what they actually want to require you of, not just whether they want you to have insurance or not, but whether they want you to have a certain level of insurance. Like if you need to have $2 million worth of insurance on the building, is going to change the amount of insurance you have to pay every month. So it's always good to know kind of all those things. And the more you research all this kind of stuff, the more it's going to give you like fodder for negotiating later. So even if like it doesn't seem that important for you, just knowing those numbers is something you can kind of pull out of your hat later and be like, oh, well, with your insurance requirements, it's going to be an extra $200 a month for me with insurance. So just always nice things to have up your sleeve. And lastly, just the right of the landlord to enter the premises, whether they can come in unannounced during business hours or even during non-business hours, and kind of how that's written in is a nice thing to look at and write to a way that feels comfortable to you. Once you kind of take a look through your lease and have a good sense of it, then you can come down to actually negotiating your lease with the landlord, which is the fun part. And there is a lot more that you can negotiate on than I think people typically consider. Rent is kind of the thing that everyone just thinks is like what you negotiate on, and a lot of people stop there. They'll just try to argue back and forth about the monthly rent, and they'll think that's kind of like the only comparable point in the entire lease, but it goes a lot deeper than that. And even just the part about rent actually can get more complicated. So aside from just arguing your rent up or down a certain amount, you can also put in different clauses that will assure the landlords a certain percentage of your profits every month, which typically will get you a lower like general rate, general rent in general, to help combat that. So that's something if you want to go down that path and kind of do some sort of profit sharing, then you can work that in. And even within that world, you can put in like protections to make sure that doesn't really come back to hurt you in the end. You can have it start at a certain point. You could even have the percentage of the profits start after you hit a certain level of profits. So only if you make this amount in a month does it kick in where you actually give a percentage to the landlord. You can even actually have things written in so that only kicks in if you hit that amount for a certain month, for a certain amount of months in a row, so that you don't have to worry about kind of like crazy fluctuations in your retail shop affecting you. So you can say like, only if I make, this amount in profits 6 months in a row do I start paying you a percentage of it. And those are just examples. I mean, you can make up anything you want, pretty much with like all these things in this lease. So just different things to take inspiration from. And there is just a lot, you can go down the rabbit hole with any one of these to get it to an area that you actually think like sounds good to you. Another really great thing to negotiate on is getting a portion of your rent free for the beginning of your lease to help you with your build-out time. So, say you're taking over a space, but you need 3 months to actually get it all set up and running, or 6 months. A lot of times you can get those 3 or 6 months free from the landlord just to be able to have the time to do construction. is a really typical thing that you can negotiate, and something that I think is often forgotten. Also, another really big one is actually the cost of building it out in the first place. I mean, what you're doing is you're adding value to their building. You know, a lot of these things that you're building out are not things you're going to be able to take with you later. So it's actually much more typical for landlords to feel comfortable paying for a lot of the improvements to their building, even though it's for your business. Up to some people get landlords to pay for the entirety of their build out cost, like hundreds of thousands of dollars, because they're signing leases for a certain amount of years. That means like the landlords will know that they're going to get that all back. So it's actually a really big negotiating point, especially if you don't have a lot of money and are trying to figure out where to get this capital start up from. Construction is a huge cost, and that can help you negate a lot of it and push it off till later. So really, really good negotiating point. At the very least, you can often get them to repair the shop to the point of it being kind of like back to a clean slate and undo everything that the previous tenant did. So always at least try to get them to kind of like, clean the carpet at least, or repair whatever the previous person screwed up, or at least make it look kind of decent and fresh again is something that most landlords are going to be pretty lenient on. The length of your lease is one of the other big points in your contract. And landlords are often going to want you to take a longer lease because it just means that they're securing a tenant in there for a while. And the length of your lease, I think, depends a lot on you and what type of business you have, and a lot mostly on how much you're investing in the actual building. So if you have a retail shop where you're just bringing in some display cases and that's it, like you just fill your display cases, then you don't actually have a lot invested in that building, and maybe a longer lease isn't that great for you because you like having the freedom of being able to move if you need to or expand easily if you need to. If you're like us and you have a float tank center, then you're building crazy double-layered soundproof walls and like adding entire systems of plumbing in. You're putting a bunch of money and expenses into a building that is something you absolutely cannot take with you. So in our case, like, it's very much in our favor to secure a spot for a longer period of time, and at the cost of losing kind of your freedom to leave at any point. What you gain is kind of a locked-in rent for that period of time. So if you're in a developing neighborhood and you see it kind of growing and being on the up and up, then having a 5-year lease or a 10-year lease where your rent only goes up $50 a year or something is really gonna pay off in the end of it. So negotiating a longer lease can often be in your advantage as well. And the longer your lease usually is, the more kind of negotiating power you get for the rest of the stuff. So if you do feel comfortable with it, really, really great point to throw in there for yourself. And then you can also put in a renewal period, which is pretty typical. So you can have a 10-year lease with a second 10-year renewal. And generally that means that at the end of the 10 years, you put in some sort of notification that says that you want to renew your lease, which you should check your lease. Sometimes it's usually written out in detail how you're supposed to do that. Like you need to send a letter, more than 30 days beforehand, like explicitly stating your intent to renew your lease for the next 10 years. So as long as you follow that, what that usually means is that they have to rent it back to you. They can't start looking for more tenants. Usually your price is renegotiated, so you'll go right back into negotiating the price and kind of maybe changing some small parts of the lease if you want. And generally, you can go in with your own offers, and they'll go in with their own offers. And you can even take it to arbitration if it seems like you're not coming to an agreement. But at the very least, they have to work with you and have to at least try to get an offer that sounds reasonable, that you can either choose to accept or not accept. So a great way to even get a bonus twice as long on your lease. And if you're worried about just being secured in a certain spot for that long, then there's a lot of things you can write into that'll help you with that. There's something called a kick-out clause, which is a clause that will let you out of your lease if you're not hitting a certain expected amount of revenue for a certain amount of months. And again, just an example of all sorts of crazy things you can just write in there and make up for whatever you want. You can just say if I'm not getting this amount of money every month that I'm expecting, then after 2 years I wanna be able to get out of my lease. Is not something that's unheard of. You can even put in just full early termination clauses in there, which just allow you to for a certain fee end your lease at any point. But again, those things then kind of tend to hurt your negotiating power, because if you do have something in there, then all the things that you're negotiating are just going to be harder to get from the landlord when he is thinking that at any point you could just early terminate. So it comes with a little bit of a price. Lastly, like, if something really goes down, most people are human beings and reasonable, and even if you don't have something necessarily fully detailed and written in, like, if you sign a 10-year lease and something happens 8 years down the road, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be able to talk to your landlord and figure something out and deal with the situation at hand. So I wouldn't feel too frightened about signing really long leases or feeling like they're completely inescapable or anything like that. Other great things that you can throw into your lease, you can do a first right of refusal for taking over neighboring spots if you want to expand in the future, or even to like buy the building if you are kind of leaning towards that path. Again, if you're like investing a lot of money into this space. And what that means, a first right of refusal, is that if any of those spots go up for rent, they are obligated to first come to you, just kind of like your renewal period, and see if they can work something out with you. And only in the case if you're not accepting their proposal are they allowed to then take it to the market. And a lot of times, like, they can even find other people's proposals and propose the same thing that they got someone else to agree to you to see if you can accept it. So it just gives you kind of like first dibs, basically, on whatever you want. Other things that is going to sound really good for you is any money you can put down right then, a deposit, and even a bigger deposit. Generally, the more you can put up front, the more that you have slack to negotiate for other points on the lease. And it generally means you're going to save money in the long run anyway. So if you do have the money, it's a really great thing to kind of put on the line. And in the same vein, how soon you can move in. Missing a month of rent is, I think, a bigger deal to landlords than we give them credit for. I mean, if you're negotiating over $100 difference between your rent price and the price that they want from you, if they miss 1 month of rent, that's like 13 or 14 months of that $100 difference that just went out the window for them. So just think about how much money they lose every month they don't have someone in that space, and kind of figure out like an equivalent amount of negotiating power that gives you. So if you're willing to move in right then, or like, that next month, that's going to really give you an upper hand, especially against other people who are in the running. So if you are ready to do it, definitely consider moving in as quickly as you can. The other things to consider is that generally the bigger the building that you're in, like the more shops or whatever is under the control of a single landlord, the crazier the kind of like clauses and complexity of the lease are typically going to be. So if you're just renting a single unit and the landlord does nothing but has this one unit, things are going to be a little bit easier. But if you're, in a shopping mall, or if you're in a kind of a place with 10 different businesses all in this one little area, there's a lot more things that go into it that you want to look into. The first thing that always comes up is something called CAM fees, which stands for Common Area Maintenance. These happen just for single units as well, but are just more elaborate for shared units. And that is the kind of like what you pay for maintenance of things that are generally in like the common area outside your shop. So the sidewalk outside your shop, if you have a parking lot, especially if you share that parking lot with other people, the landscaping, if it snows, like who plows the snow away, all the things that go into making sure your building, the kind of general area around your building doesn't start falling apart and looking decrepit, is in general kind of split amongst the people who are tenants of that building. And it's really good to make sure that stuff's spelled out in your lease as well, because there's a lot of kind of things that can be unexpectedly thrown at you if you don't look into that. Like what you're actually paying for, a detailed rundown of like what the common areas are and what their expected maintenance of them is. You can put a cap on it, say that I in my lease says I don't pay any more than this for common area fees. You can also do things to make sure that your common area maintenance fees don't raise if other tenants leave the building. So, if your neighbors leave and that shop's empty and there's nothing written in your lease, your landlord can just come back and be like, okay, well, you got to pay their fees too because now you're the only person in this building, and all of a sudden your CAM fees double. So making sure you have little things written in there to make sure you're protected from kind of crazy things like that going down is always good. There's other things you can put in called like exclusivity clauses, which actually prevents a landlord from opening a competing business in the same complex as you. And again, like these are common ones, but like, yeah, you can just kind of like custom make them for whatever you want. Co-tenancy clause is another one. which says that a tenant that is in a building that is kind of like getting a lot of traffic from one real high profile store can actually have their rent reduced if that store ends up leaving. Or if you're in a building that has 10 different businesses in it and 6 of them leave and it's just 4 of you now, like you can actually have a clause written in that says like, well, you got to drop my rent because like there's so many less people coming in here and this property is so much more devalued now. So the co-tenancy clause is a really kind of interesting one to put in. And again, like just kind of take a look at your business and see if there's anything specific to you that you can think and make up a clause for. Because those are often really easy to negotiate in because they're unexpected and the person doesn't really have any like, experience with them, and typically it's just like, sure, yeah, like whatever, I'll put in a like, there can't be any Christmas trees within a 10-foot vicinity clause, like, so for your, for your Hanukkah store. So really just kind of sit there and see how creative you can get, because those are a lot of things to kind of just like, benefit you in the long run that you can just make up and throw in there. So yeah, make up clauses.
The Hanukkah store clause.
Yeah. So now that you have come up with all these things,
The Santa Claus.
the Santa Claus is what
Like
that
the
was going to be
movie.
called. What do you actually want to bring to your negotiations? So you should kind of already know what they're expecting from you and kind of what you want at this point. And now you're actually sitting down to kind of see if you can finalize some of this stuff. And basically you want to bring in anything that can help support the things that you want in a way that's more than just like, I want this. So any sort of actual like rational evidence you can bring in to support your opinions. So if you're trying to get a reduction in rent, like go and research the typical rent of buildings that are similar to yours or in a similar neighborhood to yours. You can even look at the different real estate value of buildings over the course of the last 2 years in your city, or the actual like amount of buildings that were up for lease that got rented out within a month, and take a bunch of statistics and bring them in and be like, oh, well, I mean, like, look, the price of retail has been going down for the last 2 years. How could you possibly charge me more than this building that was rented out a year ago in this same spot? So anything that actually brings any sort of like rationality to your demands really helps in negotiations. Bringing a small presentation of your business plan is really helpful. At the very least, it just makes you seem committed and like ready to go and like you have your shit together. So, which is what landlords are looking for generally. So, like anything you can bring in to kind of emphasize the fact that you're actually taking this seriously and really committed to it, and demonstrates that you're willing to put work into it, is always going to be in your favor.
Lots of times they'll require something like that too. Like
Yeah,
a business
yeah.
plan or
That's typically like what a lot of people ask us for business plans, or ask us about business plans for, is because they're trying to find a place and like landlords won't rent it out to them until they see a business plan. Our landlord even said that like he really wanted to rent this space to a business that just had the best business plan anyone's given to him. So like yeah, they actually do look at it, and it actually does make a considerable impact, it seems, most of the time. We're generally against writing business plans, but this is one of those reasons where you can just whip one up real fast specifically for this reason. A short business plan tailored to getting you a nice retail spot. You can emphasize like how great of carpets you're going to have with your business. Bring a checkbook with you too, because like if things are going well and it's all working out, then like you just want to lay that baby out and get it secured. If it gets to the point, you just want to be prepared. If it gets to the point where you're ready to do it, then the sooner you write a check, the more likely it is to stick, and the less likely things are to go kind of crazy after that meeting. If you need time to think about it too, that's totally fine as well, but you might as well bring it just so you're prepared. And the last thing too is to just get everything actually written down in the lease that you're serious about. A lot of times, like, if you have a good relationship with your landlord, if there's someone that you know before, or if the conversations are just going really well, then it can get to a point where the landlord is just kind of giving you their word, like you're like, oh, well, what about this little part here? That kind of seems like it might actually make me vulnerable if this situation happens. And the landlord would be like, don't worry about it. Like, if that happens, I'll take care of it. Like, you'll be okay. Like, I'll totally make sure that you're fine in that situation and things like that. And like, while they may even be giving you their word and they may even stick to it, like, they may not be there 5 years, 10 years down the line when that thing does come up. They may be replaced with someone else. And when that happens, you basically don't have anything anymore because like that person's gone, and they were just kind of giving you their word. So if it is important to you, like the only real assurance is to actually have it written down in your lease. And landlords understand that too. I mean, you can just be like, yeah, great, you know, just write it down real fast because, you know, it's always nice to have it in writing. And lastly, like, what are landlords looking for, basically, when you come in? Basically, they want people who won't take up too much of their time or their money while they're there. They want people who will pay the bills on time, which seems to be, like, you know, a pretty big one, as you can imagine. I find that most landlords, if you pay your bills on time, pretty much just, like, stop bothering you about anything ever at that point. Like, you just won't hear from them. Like, they will not be hassling you if every month that bill comes in, or that check comes in. They want to know that your business has something to stand on and is not just going to completely, like, go under. So that's part of that, showing them that nice little, like, business plan, or kind of even just, like, expressing to them what your plans are for 2 or 3 years down the road. Anything that makes it seem that you yourself have thought out several years down, or want to kind of, like, show them that you're going to be in it for the long run is really going to help. They always want longer leases for that same reason. They're looking for someone who is consistent and pays that check, and as far as they're concerned, that's great. If you can put more money up front, that's usually going to help you out. If you can do an improvement to the neighborhood or to their property, that's really going to help them. Not just because it's improving their property, but because it's going to help them get higher rent for the next buildings they're trying to rent out next to that area. So if you're improving the area in general, or if you're a type of business that they're really excited about, or, you know, even if you're something that actually fits in with the other businesses that they're doing, then that's all going to be more encouraging to them and seem like a really good bonus. And I think lastly, just like being a reasonable human being, kind of like everything we talk about for every subject of business. Just kind of actually being a nice person and a real person, and talking to a landlord like they're a real person, and actually talking about what your concerns are, seems to help tremendously, and is just a good way to live your life too. So, you know, be a good person, be reasonable, talk things out, don't go in, you know, guards up and guns blazing, just kind of like go in and chat and see if you can together come up with a good agreement. Because honestly, like, when it all comes down to it, they don't want to be stuck in an agreement with some person who's going to be giving them like shit for the next 3 to 10 years either. So the more you guys can just actually talk to each other as human beings, the more it's just going to be better for everyone. And there you go. There's a little rundown on real estate and what to look for, and how to delve into your first lease negotiation and seem like an expert. And yeah, if you're at home, then there's a little PayPal button. We have our donation box in here, and other than that, I will bid you adieu.
Yay!